I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocity Easy Music. Today, I'm very excited about this one. We're going to review Blur's second album, Modern Life is Rubbish. This is one of Tom Hummer's favorite albums of all time, and it's his review, so I'm going to let him just take over.
All right, well, as he said, this was Blur's second album, came out in 1993, and to give some background on it, they'd come out with Leisure in 1991 and went on this big American tour that they really didn't want to go on, and it really made them resent American culture and musical culture.
The tour didn't go well.
No, it didn't, and it was right when Nirvana was coming out and becoming popular, and so they just hated that whole grunge scene. And then they got back to Great Britain and saw that Britain's popular culture in music was being overtaken by that American sound that they had just got done learning to hate.
Right.
So they really, it gave them a fire. It gave them something to fight against.
Right.
And so they set out to make the most British album that they possibly could, and that's exactly what Modern Life is Rubbish is. And that could be kind of a turnoff for people just because you can tell they're going so over the top. I mean Damon's vocals are even it's like he's trying to sound more British.
It's so embellished.
It's so British, and a lot of the lyrics are about British characters that he'll make up and just living in Britain.
Definitely get a lot of Beatles influence.
Oh, very
there.
much so, especially in the horns.
Right.
Whenever horns come into there, they end up sounding like the Beatles. But they were really trying to bring that British pop scene back, and it's what started British pop, Britpop music of the mid-90s, that whole scene. Now, this album is one of my favorites. It's probably tied with Self-Titled for my favorite Blur album, and here's why. Whereas you have Self-Titled, that's great songwriting, but it's more about the interesting sound, the kind of noise that makes it so unique. This album is just no gimmicks, straightforward, brilliant songwriting throughout.
It's all about the songs.
Exactly. I mean, and it makes it hard to get into at first because this album's long. It's a lot to chew on. It's a lot to take in, and when it just hits you, it's easy for it to go over your head and just say, okay, that just kind of sounded like a lot of the same thing. Right. But when you listen to it a lot, and I mean like 7 or 8 times, now understand, I've been listening to this since I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, so it's been about 15 years that I've had to listen to this album, and that's part of the reason I love it so much, because it takes a long time to really understand and appreciate the differences between the songs, how they each accomplish something different while still being able to sound similar enough to make a cohesive album. Right. And that's really the genius of this record, is that all the guitar lines, all the bass line, the drums, the way they work together, the dynamic contrast, the vocal melodies are so memorable on nearly every track, at least for me, that it just, I don't know what more I could want out of an album.
It's just such excellent songwriting. They really did a good job of while it's maybe all the ideas, I mentioned Beatlesque, a lot of the characterizations that Damon Albarn's creating, and those ideas aren't unique in their own, but they're to do them that well. I mean, they Blur did a very good job of making a very original record.
Yeah.
And one thing, one of my little minor critiques about this is I do find it is very long. It is tough to sit through all the way through, and I like one of the I tweeted that it's an achievement, like a Xbox Live achievement to get through the entire album. But because it's super long, and there's a couple different versions out there with some bonus material.
Yeah.
If you're listening to that, it's even extra.
Oh, we should probably clear that up too, because the British release didn't include the song Pop Scene. Or the 2 secret tracks at the end, whereas the American version had Pop Scene, and then When the Cows Come Home and Peach as secret tracks.
We just dropped the secret tracks.
We dropped the secret tracks, but included Pop Scene in the version we reviewed, so it's kind of a combination of both, so take that how you will.
And to give you guys some perspective on kind of, if you're not a Blur fan or never have been into Blur, but I've heard of them, mildly interested, obviously they've done more than Song 2, and if that's all you know of Blur, we strongly encourage that you go and pick up some of Blur's older and more recent work, the later 90s, like 13 or Self-Titled, but also get into Modern Life is Rubbish, Park Life, and either some of their other albums. Now, I think that Blur is a tough band to get into. For whatever reason, these guys, there seems to be like a barrier to entry. I felt this for a long time, and it's only been in like the last 3 months, would you say, that I've been really, really getting into Blur, and have become a fan of Blur's entire discography. Before, I would like certain tracks, I'd really love certain tracks, and it was an album-to-album kind of hit or miss thing for me. But just one day, like the light bulb went off, and so a general disclaimer, Blur is a band that it's almost kind of hard to attach to at times.
Yeah.
And you really have to push through that, and like Tom said, get 8 or 9 listens on an album in, especially Modern Life is Rubbish is, in my opinion, the thickest, toughest one to get into, just because there's so much material and it's so dense, it's so lush, which means it's really rewarding once you get through those barriers, but it's the type of thing that you have to devote yourself to, and when you do, it's a really rewarding experience. Now, you know, I'd say it seems like there's a lack of catchiness to the music, but Blur fans, people who are really into Blur, look at that criticism and go, that's rubbish. You know, they can't take it. They can't take it because the music is inherently catchy, but you have to pick out. You have to find the melodies, and it's kind of overwhelming when you're not exposed to it yet.
And I would actually, you know, as far as British bands go, I would consider this as a sophomore album, somewhat analogous to Radiohead's The Bin.
Absolutely.
Mainly just because, you know, it's solid songwriting throughout. Pretty similar sound, but enough differences to make it not be stale. But also just because both albums focus on the songwriting, but still have some experimentation.
Right.
I mean, you've got like Intermission on here, and Oily Water, and even Miss America are a few great examples of how they stray from more of the pop songwriting into some noisier territory, and even some kind of lo-fi stuff that you didn't really hear back then.
Right, and that's what makes this album and Blur as a band so special, is they were able to take on so many different styles within their recordings, and it really gives them a different dimension. It puts the band in a different light.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes them so hard to get into, like you were saying earlier, is that they are definitely a pop rock band. They've got some kind of heavier tracks, but when it comes down to it, a lot of their music is centered around a pop format and sound. But they're very much a thinking man's pop band.
It's very heady.
And that's what makes it hard to get into, because a lot of pop music fans just naturally don't want to think very hard about what they're listening to. But then a lot of people who like thinking about the stuff they listen to hear this at first and go, this isn't for me.
Yeah, it's almost like a metalhead's pop. Oh, well, that kind of explains why you like it so much, you know?
Yeah, maybe.
So I know what Tom's giving this. I'm going 87. Now, Blur is the type of band that any of their albums, the more you listen to them, the more you're going to love. So I expect my score to go up over time, and it certainly has over the past few months. 87 is where I'm at right now.
I'm going 100. This is a classic to me.
Tom loves it.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Are you a big Blur fan, not a big Blur fan? Let us know, and tell us what your favorite Blur album is at www.velocitiesofmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesofmusic. Let us know on Facebook and Twitter. Follow us Twitter, like us Facebook, and just get involved in the conversation. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
I turn my